Welcome everyone to the Open University's STEM faculty webinar, Biodiversity and Citizen Science, Connecting with Nature to celebrate World Environment Day. I'm Rachel Redford and I work in the STEM faculty supporting STEAM and citizen science, and I'll be moderating the forums with our comms team for questions from you to our experts today. So please ask away in the chat box and we'll address these at the end of the talk. I'm also chairing our panel of experts of speakers today, who are experts in the field of citizen science and public engagement, biodiversity, ecology and environmental science, public health and well-being, and the environment. The 5th of June has been designated as World Environment Day to highlight how the protection and health of the environment is a major issue which affects the well-being of humans, preservation of our planet, and economic development throughout the world. This year's call to arms is looking at biodiversity and time in nature and what we can do to help preserve our environment. The COVID-19 pandemic has revealed just how fragile our world is and how important time in nature is for everyone. There are lots of worldwide activities going on today to celebrate World Environment Day, so do take a look to see what else is going on throughout the day. On the slides at the moment are details of courses offered by the Open University to support nature, biodiversity and citizen science, and these will be shared in the chat box later today. So thank you for taking the time to be with us today to find out more about what you can do to help. Our expert panel is made up of 4 speakers: Janice Ansine, our Senior Project Manager for Citizen Science, Dr. David Robinson, Zoologist and Honorary Associate, Dr. Joseph Aria, Lecturer in Ecology and Environmental Science, both from the School of Earth, Environment and Ecosystems at the OU, and last but not least, Dr. Mike Dodd, Curator for iSpot, Your Place to Share Nature. After the talks, there'll be time for Q&A, so please pop these in the chat box or email stem-news@open.ac.uk. And now I'm just passing you over to our first speaker, Janice Ansine, to talk you through citizen science.
Good afternoon, everybody, and happy World Environment Day. I'll just get my slides started. So as Rachel said, I'm Janice Ansine from the Open University, and I'll get right into it. So to begin with, we decided to host this webinar looking at the theme for World Environment Day of biodiversity and connecting it with some of the work that we do in citizen science. So first of all, why biodiversity? World Environment Day is an international day of environmental action that has been celebrated since 1974 on this day, June 5th. For 2020, the theme selected is biodiversity. And it's easy to understand why this theme was selected, given the current situation we're having with COVID-19. There are concerns of species loss, degradation of nature, and how our actions are impacting on the environment. And alongside that, what can we do to help change the current sway? The campaign theme is Take Time for Nature. And along these lines, we'll be talking about how you can learn, share, and act to get involved with the biodiversity, possibly on your doorstep. So why connect this with citizen science? There's a long history connected with citizen science, and some say from the days of our early naturalists like Charles Darwin, who many of you would have heard of, used to collect and contribute to scientific discoveries. And this is the very early beginnings of volunteer work in this area that could be called citizen science. The definition, the term itself wasn't used till much later. And in 95, one school of thought looked at it as science developed and enacted by the citizens themselves. And around that time, it also looked at recognizing volunteers who collect data or scientific information across an array of habitats and locations and over long or particular periods of time. The key thing about citizen science is that anyone can participate. It gives us opportunities for deep and meaningful connections with science, and in particular for this theme with biodiversity. And it also has positive impacts on our health and well-being. what is citizen science, you may ask? I believe that there may be a lot of people in the audience who know about this, but there may be some who don't. So we'll take you through a few school of thoughts and definitions that have been emerging over the past 10 years or more. In 2014, citizen science was added to the Oxford English Dictionary with the following definition. It's the collection and analysis of data relating to the natural world by members of the general public, typically as part of a collaborative project with professional scientists. However, we do understand it is a very flexible concept. And through the European Citizen Science Association, which we are a member of EXA, we have come up with what we call 10 principles of citizen science, which help us understand how this is emerging and what we can do in terms of whether we want to get involved or implement projects ourselves. Another area is how it involves the public in scientific research, being community-driven research or global investigations. And this thought is this particular area used here is from the Citizen Science Association, which is based in the US. And in Europe, we're doing much more work to understand what citizen science is. So we're starting to understand the characteristics of citizen science and looking at the wide array of activities and practices to better understand it. Now, I'd like to ask you, a citizen scientist, have you ever heard of the concept? Is this something you've thought about, or are you already heavily involved in it? The key thing is that it's where you have an interest and a desire to get involved. It's people who are just curious or concerned, but the key thing is being motivated to make a difference. And here I use this link from SciStarter, which is a well-known platform where you can go on and find lots of different projects across the world to get involved with. It's also comprised of diverse themes, from astronomy to medicine, climate change, invasive species, conservation, monitoring air or water quality, ecology, you name it, you can possibly find something around it that people are doing. Importantly also, it goes beyond science and nature. As the Zooniverse platform states, it's people-powered research. And if you explore Zooniverse, you'll see the many, many subject areas that you can get involved in. But why, you might think about, is why the OU and citizen science? The Open University is a distance learning institution that has been around for over 50 years. And one of the key things is we maximize the use of technology for education. And in that vein, we've also embraced citizen science. Over the years, we've implemented a number of projects to help people engage. But the key thing is this is backed up by learning. So we facilitate people to learn how to identify and get involved with science and nature, as well as other areas. So a few projects we've had, for example, have been the Evolution Mega Lab, where people got involved around the world, particularly across Europe, in looking at species evolutionary trends through the movements of a humble snail. iSpot, your place to share nature, where you can develop your species identification skills, was launched in 2009. And we'll be talking a little bit more about iSpot in this presentation later on by other speakers as well. And then there's the Open Science Laboratory, which is where you can go on and see and do practical science and online experiments in an online environment. There's Enquire, where you can create scientific investigations, store and share information. And some of you may be watching the current series of Springwatch on BBC. And there's a project that the Open University has launched around pollinating species. So do go on the BBC website and get involved with that. And then there's Treezilla, our monster map of trees, which is an ambitious project where we're trying to collate particularly urban trees across the UK. The key thing about this, it calculates ecosystem services and tree health. We'll be talking a little bit more about this also and connecting with trees in your local area. And then there was Asterix, where we looked at astronomy research observatories. And this one actually implemented projects on the Zooniverse platform that I mentioned earlier. And more recently, we're very proud to say that with a number of partners across Europe and in Colombia, we're involved in a new project where we're looking at how we can design these services to better address the challenges that we face, particularly with our platforms such as iSpot. So a little bit more about iSpot. The theme of iSpot is it's a place to share nature. It's a citizen science platform for biodiversity. It's a place where you can share observations of nature, get help with identification, and learn more. And we developed it specifically for this purpose. We know that identification is difficult, so we sought to help people build their identification skills. We set up a platform and a space where people can get to nature, particularly now where you can't get outdoors. You can go on iSpot and see all the various flora and fauna that you probably you can't see because you can't travel on and travel further than home.
1 minute to go, Janice.
We also want to create new generation of naturalists and contribute to biological data involving more specialist organizations. So there are a number of ways you can get involved. I'll leave you to explore the site in your own time, but these are some of the key steps you can go through as you use the site. So I'll just quickly summarize. We're talking about World Environment Day today. We've just talked about why biodiversity and citizen science. My colleagues, David, Yosef, and Mike, will then take us through the next presentations. First, looking at biodiversity in the natural world around us, biodiversity, environment, health, and food. And then we'll close by looking at local biodiversity and citizen science in our current COVID-19 world. Thank you. David, we'll now move over to you and we'll get your slides up and running.
Thank you very much, Janice. I'm going to talk about biodiversity in general terms, and I'll pose a few questions you might like to consider as we go through.
Apologies, a little bit of a delay. I do apologize. Okay. Sorry, here we go. Sorry about that. We'll get going now. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a rich variety of life on Earth, and it's described as biodiversity. But the term doesn't just refer to the number of species or individuals that can be found in a particular habitat. Biodiversity has three major levels, the highest of which is ecosystem diversity. Now, an ecosystem can be immense, like marine and freshwater examples, or small, like a rock pool on a seashore. A set of organisms and non-biological components that are all linked by energy transfer and the cycling of components constitute the ecosystem. Below the top level is the level of species diversity, and that describes the variety of species within an ecosystem. It's the level that you'll be familiar with, I think, from its use in news and current affairs when discussing the loss of species through extinction or reducing species numbers. So here are some plants and animals from a very small geographical area in the same ecosystem, and just a reminder of how species diverse some ecosystems are, as well as being full of colour. The lowest of the three levels is genetic diversity, which applies to diversity within a species. Now, genetic diversity is very apparent in these snails because superficially it looks like lots of different species of snail, but actually there's only two. And in a population of organisms of a particular species, then there are small differences in the genome of individuals. And it's these differences that provide the possibility of evolutionary change, giving the species the potential to adapt to changing conditions in the future. But what is a species? Well, these bears look similar, a black bear from North America and a brown bear from Finland. And their common names refer to their colour, but that can be misleading because as the fur colour of black bears can be brown, And similarly, brown bears can have fur that's almost black. You will not necessarily appreciate that they actually are two species. We know they're two species because although they can produce hybrids, those hybrids are infertile. And so the two species of bear cannot interbreed. Appearance is not a perfect way to distinguish species. Now, in the last 400 years, around 1,000 species are known to have become extinct. And of course, extinction is a natural phenomenon. There's a baseline rate of extinction that's about 1 to 5 species per year. But the rate of extinction now is estimated to be around 1,000 times that base rate. And this dramatic increase is one piece of evidence suggesting that Earth is entering a sixth period of mass extinction. When a species disappears, a wide range of characteristics is lost forever, from genes and behaviors. And because each species or population that vanishes erodes the ecosystem it was linked to, there's a risk that the system will become unstable. And we humans are very dependent on functional ecosystems. So we regard conserving species and diversity as essential. Now, iconic animals like these on the screen at the moment are being conserved, and they attract money and resources to fund that conservation. However, now tourism has almost dropped to zero in many places across the world because of the pandemic emergency. What will be the consequences of that? Successful conservation efforts can also have a downside. In Botswana, elephant numbers are expanding, and the country has 135,000 of the total African population of 415,000. So now elephants are being encountered in areas that they've not been seen in for generations. This means that there are negative interactions between elephants and people, like, for example, crop raiding, which is on the increase. For subsistence farmers, this means that elephant numbers are of concern. Now, in this village, the cultivated plot is surrounded by wire, and beer bottles are suspended on wires around the cultivated area. And I was given several explanations of how the bottles were used in protecting crops. And I have to say, none of them were particularly convincing explanations. This is a real ongoing problem. And now another example, cone shells. Now they're attractive, highly collectible, and they're predatory mollusks. And being predators, oddly enough, they also have a value in research. They use toxins to kill their prey, conotoxins. And these toxins molecules may offer sources of treatments for human diseases. And so far, there are around 700 identified species, each of which has a unique blend of toxins. And so there may be thousands of different toxin molecules that we could explore and perhaps apply to human treatments. And few have been studied so far. This example, therefore, illustrates the potential value to humans of diversity in a group of species. There are estimated to be 8.7 million species, but that's an estimate. Probably less than 25% of species have been described. So, how many more species are yet to be described? And how many species will be extinct before we even discover them? I'm now going to pass you on to Josef Herrera, who's going to talk about food and the environment.
Thank you, David. I'm going to talk to you about the very relevant topic of food, especially as we relate biodiversity and how it relates to the environment and also particularly the food we consume. This is essential because it happens that there is a need for a balancing act. As David mentioned earlier, there are some good benefits and there are also some risks we face. This picture shows a farmer in Southeast Asia producing rice, and among his rice paddy you can see various types of vegetation, and also it's likely there will be a lot of different types of organisms in the water body which make his production work. Well, food is the business of everyone. In fact, the United Nations has it as one of its main sustainable development goals, a world where everyone has sufficient amount, good quality, and suitable food at all times. Now, too often we think of food as being quantity, but actually 1 out of 8 of the world's population lacks food in some way. Either it is not the right amount, or it could be not of good quality. Now, several civilizations have risen and fallen simply based on what foods they can provide their population, their armies, and all citizens really. In fact, it's a fact which has been so recognized, and even among the first Nobel Peace Prize for food and agriculture has come to Norman Borlaug, who was behind the Green Revolution. And he has put it in a small way, saying like, civilization as known today couldn't have evolved without adequate food supply. Well, thinking of from a farmer's point of view, indeed, all amounts of food that are produced are one, but also there is a lot of wild foods that people consume, hunter-gatherer population consume. So the picture is large, whether it is a plant, a fungi, or animal you consume, it does link up with the diversity of life on Earth. But what is the benefit of biodiversity for food production? Well, first of all, to define it broadly, in this sense, biodiversity, we mean all types of organisms, whether they are wild or domesticated, but also we are thinking very much close to the varieties we have within a particular crop as well. In general, biodiversity, first of all, provides us with resources, whether it is food directly, or whether it is animal feed, or the things we wear, like cotton fibers, or the fuel we burn, for example, charcoal. So it is a primary source of food and energy, but probably less recognized for the average person is its function in terms of ecosystem services. Now, by ecosystem services, we mean all the processes that happen in our world, whether it is the water we drink, what purifies it, whether it is pollination of crops that makes them help grow fruit and fiber, and whether it is breaking down of dead materials. All these services are into the grand scheme of nature. And a third one is relating to resilience. A diverse system means there are more options and more supportive characters that help organisms survive and make us have more options to eat. For example, if there is a disease pandemic of a crop, for one, it's likely there will be some which are resistant, so that we have an option. Or it could be the weather, the climate changes and it gets too dry. at least there might be one which is resilient for that. So these are one of the key functions of biodiversity and how it very much closely links to our food production. In fact, the Food and Agriculture Organization has published a whole section, a whole report about biodiversity of food and agriculture in the last year. Taking back to some examples, there is this distribution of origin of plants in the world. Due to advancements in transport and production techniques, we are actually very lucky to be able to sample food from different parts of the world. Out of the 6,000 domesticated crops which are being consumed, they come from all over the place. Some even places which we don't think they are from. Potatoes, so popular in Western Europe, hail their origin from South America in Peru. And bananas, they come from Southeast Asia. But people's tastes, and especially the globalized nature of our cuisine, has meant we are consuming things from different parts of the world. So that means there is a very efficient transport that is needed. But at the same time, it gives us option, especially in post-COVID-19 world. We are focusing much more on what we can consume, what we can get very close at home, and what is also efficient in terms of resources that we can use. Looking a little deeper, it's not only the varieties of crops we are talking about, it's also the different genotypes which we call as varieties. For example, sweet corn hails from Central America, but these are only few examples of the different types of sweet corn we can get. It's very likely most of us only know one or two of those varieties. Simply it is because the others are being forgotten, or at worst becoming extinct because of the way we consume and the way our environment changes. So as David mentioned earlier, we don't have to look only at the big, important species, but also the little ones that can be a lifesaver in the future. But our concern is, how is all this damage happening? The eminent ecologist Howard Odum had said it. In fact, humanity no longer eats potatoes made from solar energy or as naturally as they are, but also partly from oil. He means all the resources we put, the fertilizers, the pesticides. Unfortunately, despite their support of the particular crop being grown, or particular animal we are breeding, they do have an intended consequence of damage of others. So that is our biodiversity is at peril. In fact, to an extent, we are losing species much more frequently than would be expected.
One more minute to go.
That has meant that we are also running low on our food supply because of the decline of biodiversity. To balance our biodiversity and our food production. So all the way from the there are many solutions, but action and consumption, and so that our environment is well controlled and well supporting our biodiversity. I will put you next to my colleague Mike, who will tell you about biodiversity at a very local nature.
Thank you, Joseph. I think your sound went a bit strange at the end there, but I'm going to be talking about biodiversity at a very local level. Certainly here in Britain, we've been very much restricted in our movements. but that's been an opportunity to look at the biodiversity around us in the gardens, streets, parks, and in the local area. And one of the most obvious aspects of biodiversity are the trees we see around us, often in the streets or in the parks, or perhaps if you've got fortunate enough to have a garden, and in our gardens. So one of the most obvious ways to identify trees is by looking at the leaves. On this picture here, we've got, for example, a horse chestnut tree, a very large leaf with individual lobes coming out from a central area. And then also on the right-hand side, there's a couple of leaves with individual leaflets coming off from a central stalk. On the far right, there's an ash leaf, and next to it, a mountain ash leaf. They are very, they're not closely related to each other, but the leaves look rather similar. And I'm going to be focusing on this leaf here. You can see with a mouse. There's many leaves have a general similar shape, a sort of an oval shape, undivided. But this leaf here is from a lime tree. In Britain, limes are the scientific name is Tilia. They're large trees. They're not similar at all to the citrus type of lime. So here we are. Here are the three common types of lime trees we see in our streets and parks. These are all large trees. I mean, first of all, if we look at the central one here, there's a small-leaved lime, which has, as you see there, small leaves. And then on the right-hand side, we've got broad-leaved lime, which has large leaves. And on the left, we've got the common lime. So the leaf shape is very similar for all of these. And it's not a particularly good idea to look at leaf size, because sometimes the leaf size can be quite different to what you expect, especially if you've got a fast-growing shoot from the base or something like that. So today, in fact, I saw some small leaf lime leaves which were more or less the same size as the broadleaf lime tree leaves. So you have to focus, when you're looking at biodiversity, you often have to focus in great detail at small differences. So if we look here at the underneath the leaf, and we're looking in closely at the veins, they have small reddish hairs. So that's the small leaf lime, small reddish hairs. On the broadleaf lime, they have hairs all over the veins and all over the stalk here as well, but they don't have these reddish leaves in the junctions. And the common lime has hairs in the junctions, but they are a buff color, not red. And so the common lime has sort of intermediate characteristics of these other two species. And then if we look at the scientific name of the common lime, Tilia crosseuropea, it has a cross in the middle, and that indicates that it's a hybrid. And it is indeed a hybrid between the common and broadleaf lime. It's a naturally occurring hybrid found in the wild, but also it's very widely grown. It's very easy to grow. All these are quite easy to grow. So that they are very widely used in streets and parks. One disadvantage some people think of these lime trees is that they have the lime tree aphids, one species of aphid in particular, that produces a honeydew, a sort of sticky substance, and a fungus, a sooty mold, can grow on this. And if you have this on dripping down from the tree, if it lands on your car, then you may not be very keen on it. However, it's been discovered that this sooty mold can actually facilitate the breakdown of a lot of toxic chemicals in the air in cities. So actually, it may have some beneficial effect. Okay, so there are two other types of lime trees you find in cities. These are can be less common, and they were one of the reasons that they're planted is because they are much less affected by the aphids. One of which is the silver lime. This is easy told because the underside of the leaves are this a whitish color. That's due to a very dense covering of hairs, and the aphids don't like that. There are two forms of this silver lime. One has a normal growth form, and another one has a very the branches that hang down. So that's the silver pendant lime there. And the other one, which you often find in streets, is the Caucasian or Crimean lime, and this has glossy leaves. So the leaves that you can see here quite glossy, and often has the greenish twigs as well. And this one, the aphids don't like. This has glands on the leaves that the aphids don't like. Okay, so that we've been looking at the leaves. If you look at the whole tree, the tree on the right here is the silver pendant lime. That has a very nice autumn color as well. All the limes have this yellowy leaves in the autumn, but this is particularly nice or spectacular. And on the left, this is a natural population of small leaf lime. The limes now, the native species, are actually rather rare in the wild. So they used to be a lot more common, but they're now quite rare. And this is a population of small leaf limes near Milton Keynes, and these have been coppiced, so that the trunks just grow up. Then after a few years, they're cut. The wood is used, and then the tree grows up again. And you can see this has happened many times here. And these coppice stalls grow bigger and bigger and bigger over time. And some of these can be 1,000 years or more old, and they're just cut back in and regrow. So the tree itself can be very old. Limes have many uses for the wood and indeed for fibre and many other uses. Okay, so a couple of other types of lime which are starting to be grown in streets and parks. These are relatively recently discovered species, 100 years or slightly over ago. On the left, we've got Mongolian lime, and you look at those leaves, and they don't look like a lime leaf at all. They're very, very strange shape. It's quite a nice, relatively small tree from East Asia, China, that area. Also from East Asia and China, that Henry's lime on the right-hand side here. This is perhaps my favourite type of tree, with these very nice soft edges to the leaf, jaggedy edges, and also quite big clusters of flowers. All the limes produce flowers which are very attractive to bees, and they produce very nice honey. But this one flowers very late in the autumn, so where there's less other sources of pollen around and nectar. So if you go, well, I've stood under one of these trees, and it's absolutely very, very loud, with all the bees and other insects collecting the pollen on those. Okay, so now on to bring things together and mention two of the projects, citizen science projects that Janice mentioned at the beginning. On the left, these are some of the trees in iSpot. So this is just a small part of Milton Keynes where Open University is based, and these are some of the trees. You don't need to know what the names mean, but it's just to note that there are many different species, many different names. And these are just a few of the trees on iSpot. And the project on the right is Treezilla, another Open University Citizen Science project. And this is looking at ecosystem services. So I've outlined the same area, it's the same area on here. And this shows in this small part of the city, 1,400 trees have been recorded. and they are producing annual benefits, ecosystem service benefits of £150,000 a year. And you can see how that's broken down into carbon storage, air quality improvements, stormwater filters, and energy conservation. So you can see that these trees are providing services to humans of a huge amount of money, monetary value each year. Okay, I'll now hand back to Rachel for questions.
Thanks very much, Mike, and thanks very much to everyone for your fascinating talk. I do believe we had a little bit of a problem with live video being interrupted on Facebook at some point during the end of the talk there. Sorry about that to everyone. I think they still had audio, but we did have some problems with the actual live video connection. So apologies for that. I have had a couple of questions come through straight away already. So I'll just go into a question which is kind of posed for everyone from Shelza Tuari. And she says, species extinction is a phenomenon which is an alarm for us to stop disturbing our nature. But still it is not given due importance. So the question is, why do you think there is such a negligent attitude towards species extinction?
I think that's one for you, David. You're muted, David.
Yeah, sorry, just thinking.
So just read the question again, so you've got a little bit of time. Species extinction is a phenomenon which is an alarm for us to stop disturbing our nature, but still it is not given due importance. Question being, why is there such a negligent attitude towards it?
I think that we take a rather human-centric view of the world, and we're very concerned about animals becoming extinct, perhaps less concerned about plants. And it's those that are large and we can see that attract attention. Also, of course, it's quite difficult to conserve, say, small insect species that are actually extremely important in pollination. And I think that's why we appear to take a negligent attitude, partly because it is very difficult to conserve everything, and you need a huge sums of money in order to do so.
Great. Actually, one of the other questions was relating to profit, but I haven't been given details of when that question came in, which was essentially why is profit considered more important? And I think it may have been when Joseph was talking through his food health slide. So perhaps you'd like to.
Yes. Unfortunately, the marketization and monetization of food has meant there is a bigger emphasis on the profit bottom line, which didn't used to be the case in the old, the distant past. People consumed for subsistence, and whatever left was used for exchanging or bartering. So as food becomes monetized and our people who are producing food is shrinking in terms of percentage, especially in the developed world, it has meant that there is even fewer and bigger farms, which would profit at the bottom line. But there are a lot of ways this has been tackled. There is environmental sustainability concepts and food safety issues. And basically, the way our food system is at the moment needs to change. And there are a lot of small-scale pushbacks by local producers, like buying local or smallholder holdings. But unfortunately, it is part of our global food financial system, which has meant too often profit seems to drive the situation. But hopefully, as awareness increases and as people become more empowered as well, that attitude will hopefully shift, and hopefully it will get less.
Do you think profit has something to answer for in terms of species extinction as well?
Yeah, indeed. If you think of it, agricultural production, we are focusing, for example, in terms of varieties. There are 6,000 varieties of apples, for example, but that's in Britain. And if you go to the market, about 50% is only one variety. And why do producers do that? Because partly consumers want a specific type and shape and color and texture of apple, and partly it is the way the production system has become more efficient, targeted towards that particular variety. So yeah, at local level it can affect like varieties, but at bigger level there are several what they call them orphan crops which are consumed by small scale producers, for example in Africa, which haven't been improved, which don't make it into the global market, and which are even less consumed now because they are hard to produce and they don't produce yield. So definitely it does have an impact.
Okay, thank you. Also, another question which came through, which is, can I learn more about becoming a citizen scientist, and how can I support sustainability and recording wildlife by being a citizen scientist?
I'll start with that, and then maybe Mike might want to come in. There are many ways you can learn. I'll start with an opportunity we have at the Open University, where we have created a free course about citizen science and global biodiversity. And I just popped the link up on here now, and they're probably popping it somewhere in the chat so you can see it. And in this, we explore many of the things we've talked about today in more detail, and you have the chance to browse through it over an 8-week course at your own leisure. But there are other opportunities. There are many organizations now who are trying to do a bit more training and offer more support to get people engaged with citizen science and involved. So do have a look out with what organizations in your local area to see what they're doing, and just try to do your bit, do what you can. There are many online tools like iSpot, there's Zooniverse, there are many that you can go and just put information in and support things in different ways. So you can do your little bit, no matter how much time you have, no matter, it doesn't matter, no matter where you are and what you can do, you can make your own contribution. I'll let Mike pick up on the question.
Yeah, well, I'll mention for iSpot, since I'm the curator of that project. So if you want to go and identify, or oops, have I got my, yes, I'm not muted now. If you want to go and find out more about nature, you can identify things, add a picture and put it on, and the community will help identify what it is. There can be a two-way conversation, so you can ask questions and people will talk to you as well on that. So it is a community, so everyone can get involved.
Lovely. Thank you. I've also been reminded that if anyone who was watching the Facebook connection or even the YouTube and hasn't posted questions but wanted to or wasn't able to, you can put your questions through to stem-news@open.ac.uk, and we'll pop the answers back on the chat thread so that everyone can still have their answers to the question. So apologies if there is a problem with your connection and you wanted to ask questions and weren't able to, but we can certainly do that. And if you have any further questions on any of the areas that we've talked about today, please do email in, and we'll address that for you. I think we've probably got time for possibly one more question. So I want to help our wildlife survive. What's the best thing I should do?
I think the first thing is you have thought about it, which is it's often awareness that leads into participation and action. So you've taken the first big step of being aware about the crisis that is happening in our wildlife and biodiversity. So the first bit is building up knowledge, and I think the next action and participation probably will involve liaising with whether it is local or international, or whether it is virtual, or whether it is physical conservation and bodies or like-minded people. And that also includes any citizen science project in that line. I will hand over to my colleagues for further.
I would also say that it's useful to take the opportunity just to look around you when you are outside. There's an awful lot of interesting things that you can see in what appears to initially to be a rather unpopulated landscapes. And I reckon that if you actually go out looking for looking at the environment around you, probably most days you would see something that you'd not seen before. A bit of behavior, an animal, plant, particular changes with weather. There's always something new to look at, and that process of looking and observing will also then encourage you to find out more and find out what you can do to conserve the environment around you.
Mike, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to absolutely. That's so I talked about one tiny little group of trees. I mean, I could have talked about numerous other different groups of organisms. So that's one. I was looking at a very specific, looking at the fine details. But there are thousands of species. So some of the people on iSpot, I've looked just in their back garden, and some of them have produced hundreds of different records of different things. So as David says, the more you look, the more things you find, and then you can find out about information about them. Why are they declining? What find out about the ecosystem they live in. Are they declining because that there's less of that habitat left? Does the habitat need to be conserved? Once you start looking, you start asking these questions, and then you find out whether you need to join organizations or what action you need to take.
Thank you.
I'd just like to emphasize that it's important that in these small ways we can all learn and share, and it's through this learning and sharing that we'll be able to contribute to the reduction of biodiversity loss. Information is power, and power will enable us to act and do more.
Great, thank you very much. It looks like the Facebook Live connection may have stopped, but I think it's still working fine for YouTube. I'll just see if there was one more question we can get through. I think we've covered them. What can we do to help sustainability? Will the COVID-19 pandemic affect our food supplies? I don't know if that's something you want to talk a little bit more about, Joseph.
Yes, I think it certainly has made us think differently about locally produced food, and not to be too reliant on expensive, environmentally costly transportation, and also making less of a waste of our food resources, and better storage and better consumption, and probably more people are cooking and staying very close at heart, and people trying to produce their own local food, even if it's not sufficient. It is the right way of thinking, but in a big picture, post-COVID-19 world has to look at the overall biodiversity, our food production system, and basically our attitude to nature. It definitely has got to change.
I think a lot more people are doing things at home, aren't they? Growing their own. Seems to be quite a big move since the pandemic. So maybe that's in a way quite a positive thing.
Indeed,
certainly our allotment association, where I live, there were always some allotments free, but this year they've all been taken, and there's a waiting list, and they're all being intensively cultivated. So yeah, people are trying to produce their own food now.
Okay, lovely. I think we may have answered all the questions. There was quite a few that were very similar. But if anyone hasn't managed to type their answers, their questions up, and would like to ask more, as I said, we've got the stem-news@open.ac.uk email address, and please do post any questions you have on there, and we'll add them to the thread below the Facebook Live and YouTube chat.
I think that leaves us to wrap it up and to say thank you all for joining us today. Apologies for the startup hiccups. We're all working and living in a different world nowadays, but it was fantastic to be able to come to you in your living rooms, in your gardens, wherever you are today. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you all, hopefully physically out there soon. Take care. Bye-bye.